When customers open new support requests with the service desk, there needs to be some kind of indication when it should be closed. This is normally defined in a service level agreement, or SLA for short. SLAs provide an expected duration between opening a support request and when it should be closed. Now, these durations can differ based on the type of customer, services impacted, as well as the priority levels applied to the support request. So let's just say that there was a service level of 3 working days. For example, from Monday to Wednesday. So if the customer rings at 9 AM on Monday morning, then the target SLA resolve date and time is 5 PM Wednesday afternoon. Now, from the perspective of support, this equates to 24 working hours. But from the perspective of the customer, they see it as 3 days. Now, be careful not to miss the subtle differences here, because these two different perspectives can eventually snowball out of control. Let me demonstrate. If the customer raises their support request at 12 PM on Monday, then the target resolution date and time is now 12 PM Thursday. So the support perspective is still 24 hours. But for the customer, it's now 4 days. So it looks as if the customer experience is 50% agreement and 50% perception. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. We'll just tell the customer that their perception is incorrect. Well, you may be technically right, but you're actually emotionally wrong. This is because, according to Colin Shaw, the author of the book DNA of the Customer Experience, 70% of the customer's experience is emotional, which is solely derived from perception. So when the dust settles and the customer satisfaction survey gets filled out, the reality is, it's 4 days, baby. Another scenario to consider is, what if the customer raises the support request at midday on Friday? Taking into consideration that both Saturday and Sunday are not included in the SLA, the target resolve day and time would be midday next Wednesday. So what is still 24 working hours for support has now become 6 days for the customer. To add to this dilemma, some support organisations like to pause the SLA whenever they need to escalate a support record to another internal team or an external vendor or supplier. Their reasoning sounds like this: why should we breach our SLA to our customers if we are powerless to solve it and we depend on other people to solve it? Now, this sounds reasonable, but their logic is flawed simply based on a misunderstanding of the difference between service level agreements and operational level agreements. A service level agreement, or SLA for short, is an agreement between a service provider and their customer, where an operational level agreement, or OLA for short, is an agreement between internal operational support and delivery teams. OLAs are designed to support the SLA and reduce the likelihood of SLA breaches. And it's common to require multiple OLAs in order to deliver a single SLA. We will cover this in more detail shortly. This misunderstanding can often cause some unwanted reactions from customers. Let's say, for instance, the service desk decide to pause the SLA clock for 3 days because they need to send the customer request to a different team. Now, this maintains the service desk's performance measures at 24 working hours, but from the customer's perspective, which we now know is reality, is now up to 9 days. This misunderstanding can cause shock and even confusion when the service providers seek feedback from their customers on the quality of their service that they've just delivered. The customer satisfaction scores don't seem to correlate with the actual SLA measurements recorded in the internal reports. So it seems that support measure their performance on effort, whereas the customer is focused on duration. Now, there are legitimate reasons for pausing the SLA clock, but this should never be exercised to serve the purposes of the support provider rather than the purposes of the customer. So let's refer back to the service level agreement. Its expected duration consists of 3 timeline statuses, which is good, warning and breach. Now, it's not uncommon for specific types of support requests to require work from multiple separate internal support teams within an organisation. Each of the teams making up what is often termed as the support value chain. In this example, there are 3 teams required to resolve the support request. The support value chain consists of Level 1, the service desk, Level 2, desktop support, and Level 3, application development. Each team adds their value until the support request is fully completed, when the most value is realised by the customer. So in order to ensure that the SLA is not breached, the total expected duration stipulated in the SLA needs to be broken down into smaller segments or timeframes called operational level agreements. Now, these agreements and their timeframes need to be small enough to consider handover times between each of the internal teams. A common statement heard from support managers is, "I'd like to know which team was working on the support record when the SLA breached." This may seem like a simple enough question, but it's often fraught with danger. As the heat turns up on the team who is caught with the SLA breach, all the finger pointing starts. Just ask yourself how many times you've heard this scenario. The application development team points at the previous team saying, "The desktop team only sent it to us this morning." Desktop support point their finger at Level 1 saying, "The service desk took too long to assign it to us." And the service desk fires back at them saying that "We sent it immediately. Desktop took too long to acknowledge the assignment." Now, this behaviour is not conducive of the harmonious support system centred around an amazing customer experience, is it? And to be fair, you really cannot punish a team caught with the SLA breach, especially when they've only had it for a few hours. There's actually a rugby league term for this. It's called a hospital pass. I have seen firsthand teams escalate their support records to other teams just before the SLA breaches so their monthly reports don't show them. Now, to stop the finger pointing, we need to plan and clearly define our OLAs. You know, it's one thing to have an SLA breach, but it's another thing to understand why it has breached. A well thought out and well-defined OLA model can provide tremendous insight into just exactly where and why your SLAs have breached. It can also show you where to focus your efforts to rectify these breaches. So let's look at the components that make up a single OLA. There are 3 OLA metrics to consider. Number 1, acknowledgement. Number 2, escalation. And number 3, team resolve. The acknowledgement metric is the amount of time taken for the escalation recipient team to acknowledge that the support record has been assigned to them from the escalation sending team. This metric wards against support records falling into the elusive black hole. It also ensures that escalation teams commit resources to monitoring new work coming into their queue. The escalation metric is the time threshold that the current owned by team has to escalate to the next team if they are unable to complete the support request. This acts like a time buffer to consider the handover time for the next escalation team in the support value chain. The team resolve metric is the time threshold that the current owned by team has to complete their piece of work. If the current owned by team cannot fully resolve the issue and they need to send it to the other team, any time taken beyond this target will eat into the next team's OLA time allocation. This will increase the risk of breaching the customer SLA. Each metric has 2 date and time triggers. The first is the warning date and time, which alerts the owner of the support record that they are drawing near to the second trigger, which is the target date and time. This is the estimated threshold time in which the OLA metric should be completed. Each metric can trigger one of 3 events. If the metric is achieved before the target date and time, it will be marked as achieved and it will create an achieved OLA transaction log event. Next, if the current date moves past the warning date and time threshold, then a warning event will display and will also create a warning OLA transaction log event. And finally, if the current date and time moves past the target date and time, then it will be marked as breached and will create a breach OLA transaction log event. Placing a support record in the pending status will also pause the OLA metrics clocks. Let's say, for instance, that the current time is 12:15 p.m. and we pause it for 30 minutes until 12:45 p.m. Now, if the current active SLA that's been applied to the support record has stop the clock enabled, then the pending duration of 30 minutes is also appended to the OLA metrics warning and target times. So with all these additional features, now when an SLA breaches, we can see exactly where it occurred in the support value chain, as well as which metrics are breaching, whether it be acknowledge, escalate or team resolve.